As you see, I'm going to read mainly because English is not my first language. And to tell you the truth, my presentation today is based on my master's thesis, which were around 120 pages, even more than with all the interviews and so on. So I had to reduce it on for this presentation. Firstly, I want to thank you for the possibility to talk in front of you, especially as this is the possibility to present a part of my master's thesis, which I defended not even 2 weeks ago. It was about this war of mine, which is, as you know, very much a game about the apocalypse, because it's a game about war. And war is for everyone involved in it, an apocalypse itself. And I want to start with 2 citations. The first one: my son was supposed to start at nursery school, and I wanted to do a master's degree in linguistics. But the war took that away from us. Not just physical objects, but also longings, hopes, and dreams. The past year has been terrible. Our everyday life means a daily struggle for basic things like clean water and hot meals. In the first few months, there was no flour, vegetables, or fruit on the markets. Now I can't find warm clothes for my son, and winter is just around the corner. And the second one: we all had already suffered from war and blockades before, but it was possible to build a life in dignity and try to find solutions in these difficult circumstances. There was a form of stability. People tried again and again with new projects. My greatest fear is losing my family, my loved ones. The fear of being hurt is also great. The wounds are so deep. There are thousands of people with amputated limbs. People are desperate, but they believe that one day they will be able to return to their homes, their cities, and their lives. People want to feel safe. Sadly, those 2 citations are not from the game This War of Mine. I found them just the day before yesterday in the newspaper Standard. Citations of victims of war in Gaza. We in the Western world cannot fathom such horrible experiences, and I hope we will never live through them. Nonetheless, it is important for us to recognize such horror, to feel empathy, and to get a glimpse of the everyday situation people are living through in a war zone in their own apocalypse. This war of mine is a game of a local apocalypse. It is a game designed to show us the scarcity of resources, the struggles of daily life, and the uncertainty of the end of one's misery in a war zone. By playing different characters, searching for food, medicine, and materials, by reading their diaries and thoughts, and doing our best to help them survive in a fictional town in a realistic war setting, players can experience what it is like as a civilian in a war, but fortunately escape at the end of the game and return to their safe world. But even though they can turn their back to the misery of war and to the apocalypse, something must have happened to the players and to their view on war and power. Coming from the didactics of history and politics, I asked myself, how does a serious game such as This War of Mine change existing historical preconcepts? Preconcepts are mental structures and ideas before they are changed into more scientific and deepened concepts through school, museums, etc. So how are they changed? There must be some kind of influence through wars like this, through games like this, a War of Mine. On just a few slides, I want to show you the theoretical frame underneath it without going into too much detail. We are generally talking about historical learning, which is learning concerning the past, how we gain access to it, and how we can process it. The main learning theory I focused on is the theory of conceptual change, which is based on constructivism. This means people have their ideas and concepts, and by confronting them with more examples and exemptions, and by reflecting on them, they deepen them. This is the main idea of conceptual historical learning. Then we got to talk about digital or new media, an old topic, but for school it is quite modern. As a professor of mine once said, there is just one thing developing slower than church, and that is school. So we are still legitimizing the advantages of modern media in school, for example, of video games, in comparison to older analog ones, just as the schoolbook. And here we also find the topic of serious games, or even in more detail, the topic of digital game-based learning, which embeds serious games within the big frame of edutainment, but also of media education, the reflection on production and reception of the digital medium itself. And finally, they in Austria used Für-Kompetenz-Structure Model. Für stands for the German abbreviation Förderung und Entwicklung eines reflektiven und selbstreflexiven Geschichtsbewusstseins. So it is the promotion and development of a reflective and self-reflexive historical awareness. The Für-Kompetenz-Structure Model consists of 4 major areas. The questioning competence, where one has to ask and reflect on historical questions on sources and depictions. The methodological competence is about and reconstructing the past and narrations. The orientational competence wants to develop a sense of time within history. And the historical expertise collects not only all the knowledge, but also the reflection on things as terms, categories, scripts, and concepts, through the terminological and competence and the structuring competence. Just as your information, I tried to translate that from German into English. It's not that easy because it's a German concept developed in Germany around 2005, 2006, then brought into the Austrian school system in around 2009, and then further implemented into the school system, always in German. I had really difficulties to translate that one. There are in total 17 different concepts. In my master thesis, I focused on 4 of them: the power, agency, norms, and distribution. Today, I want to present you the predominant one, power. Power is important during the apocalypse because most of the time people at or in war feel powerless. So how can someone access those preconcepts? Normally in school, you could easily take a standardized test, but questioning something inadvertently starts a reflection and therefore a change in the concepts themselves. So my primary source were Steam reviews. They aren't forced or asked for specifically. They are free expressions of one's mind, ideas, and reflections on the game. So they were perfect to highlight the preconcepts. I took 2025 Steam reviews, and with an inductive categorization, I developed a total of 32 subcategories in 7 main categories. I did so inductively, for the specific content of the reviews was not foreseeable. One of the main categories, near, for example, agency, norms, and distribution, was also power. By describing and testing those categories, the category norm wasn't functioning, and I had also one category called other as a sorting category to sort out the lesser useful reviews. At the end, there were 1,061 usable reviews with 3,449 assignments left. So as you can see, one review could also be coded multiple times. In addition, I took a qualitative approach by taking 4 interviews. Each of the interviews was a 4-hour session divided into introduction to the game, playing the game, and an interview. All test subjects played the game for the first time and had different gaming experience from none to daily. The results of those interviews gave me additional reflection, and I could ask for more detailed information. So these were the general results of the reviews. I don't want to go too much into detail, but as you can see in the center, there are the different main categories, and in the other 3 diagrams, you can see the distribution within the categories. Just to highlight a few of those, the game was seen as a suspensive game, which led to negative emotions such as sadness, but also to reflective questions. Most of the players see this war of mine as a game on decisions and consequences, highlighting especially the crafting and survival aspects. Today we talked already about this war of mine being an anti-war game, as you can see there on the top right corner. It's very often mentioned as a game about war and the topic about war, but not mentioned very often is specifically as a game against the war, to highlight the cruelty of war. And that's exactly what this subcategory is all about. The main focus today lies on the aspect of power. Power is normally defined by a hierarchy built by a surplus of resources or simple physical power. I divided power into two main subcategories: forms of escalation and victims. War itself was the most prominent form of escalation, followed by physical violence, such as killing or hurting someone, and by non-physical violence, such as suppression, threat, lack of assistance, or theft. On the other hand are the victims. While 2/3 of the accordingly coded reviews highlight the individual victims, just 1/3 highlights the civil population itself, just as the society or humanity or bigger groups. In conclusion, players mostly recognize war as the highest form of power within the game and the individual as the victim of such a form of power. The interviews give us a deeper insight into the concept of power. The reason lies within the scenario I let the test subjects play. I don't know if some of you played the scenario, the last broadcast within. Okay. There are just two characters playable who try to run an old radio station. They are searching for information about the current state of war and about places in high danger, etc. They try to use their own power, mainly gained through information, to help others. In the interviews talking about power, the focus shifted heavily to this new aspect, the aspect of information. So power is hidden because information is nothing which has to be shared or shown. It forms a hidden hierarchy. There is a little mistake in the orthography because originally I wanted to write multiple times of hierarchies, because there's a hierarchy of resources, there's a hierarchy of physical power, and there is also the hierarchy of information. Then, secondly, knowledge is power. It affects one's own agency and possibilities. The third test subject even reduces the power gainable from information on the own possibilities to use those information. If you cannot utilize information, then you have no power. And finally, power is the freedom too. It never limits, and it is always a symbol of inequality. So it is the symbol of hierarchy. So as I hoped to have shown you with the example of power, serious games such as this war of mine have a huge influence on preconcepts, and therefore video games can broaden the minds of young and adult persons alike. The game changes the perspective from the war-leading factions to the civilists as victims of war, and it highlights the important part of information as a part of power. There is also a connection between power and the other concepts. If we are talking about the distribution of resources, for example, the norms of powerful persons a powerful person does not always follow anymore, or the possibility of action a powerful person can gain through, for example, information. The concepts are highly intertwined. This conceptual learning takes place unconsciously and needs to be consciously deepened. And because games are increasingly becoming part of people's lives at all ages, they also need to be given more consideration in education, but be it at school or be it in museums. We can learn even from the apocalypse. Thank you very much for your attention.